In this lecture, you will learn YAML. YAML is required to work with Docker Compose, all the Kubernetes configuration files, and you will also see it in Ansible section. So YAML has become a standard in the DevOps world for configuration files. It's very easy. Go to the file menu in Visual Studio Code, create a new file, save it as demo.yaml or YML. Either of those two extensions will work. I am saving it under DevOps folder. You can save it anywhere on your machine. Visual Studio Code has support for YAML, so it's going to help us with a lot of things. Comments in YAML start with the pound symbol or the hash symbol. Whatever you type in after that will not be processed by a YAML processor. YAML stands for Ain't Markup Language. So it claims that it is not another markup language like XML. XML, usually used for configuration, is machine readable, but it is very hard for humans to read XML. YAML, on the other hand, is very easy for humans to understand. At the same time, it is very easy for the machines to parse it. YAML is a superset of JSON, which you are already aware of. Superset of JSON. So JSON is very popular in the web services world, especially the RESTful web services. We exchange data between applications using JSON. So YAML gives us additional capabilities. We can define complex type and embedded blocks, as well as YAML have comments as well. That's the reason YAML is used in most of the DevOps tools for configuration, especially Docker Compose, Kubernetes, and even Ansible uses YAML files. So YAML gives us simple types. We can define simple types of data like integers or numbers, numeric data, character data. We can even define null and so on. Then we can create lists of data. We can define objects, and we can also define dictionary or map types of data. And we can validate all this using a YAML validator. When you use tools like Docker Compose, automatically when you run Docker Compose, you provide it your compose file that you have created, the YAML file, it will automatically parse it using the YAML parser. It will validate it for you. So let's type in our very first YAML notation or the YAML element, customer name. So let's say we are working on a order processing application. We are working for Amazon or any other e-commerce website, and we are processing their orders. For them, we are creating our own YAML file. Customer name, you can enter your own first name here. So this is how we define elements within YAML. This is the metadata or key, and this is the value. Next, let's try one more. Order of this customer, order ID, colon. There should be a space after this colon. Only then the YAML processor knows that this is the key and this is the value. Otherwise, there is no way it will know about it. Here, provide a space, 1, 2, 3. Next, give it a date of the order, say 12/12/2020 in the future as of now. Then shipped is a flag. You can specify a value false. It is not shipped yet. Next, you can provide more data if required. Any other additional information about this order, you can use value null. So this is how you can define values, and these values will be passed by the YAML processor, and they will be given over to your application or a tool like Docker Compose or a tool like Kubernetes or Ansible. So when this data is handed over to those tools, they will interpret the data depending on these element names here. I will show you those files in a second once you learn these. So this is how you can specify simple data. But now let's get into a list. So what products does this order contain? As soon as you hit enter here, you see this indentation. So this indentation is very important. We'll get to that. To create a list, the first way to do it is to use a hyphen space, add the element in the list. Products, you can simply declare the products here, say MacBook. MacBook is the first product, then one more product, say iPhone, then desktop computer, whatever you want. So all these, this is how you define a list. But the important thing here, you have to maintain this indentation. Thanks to Visual Studio Code, automatically it is maintaining the indentation. Make sure you use a space between this hyphen and the element itself. Otherwise, you will see errors at runtime. That's the reason I have suggested you can validate your YAML by using an online YAML editor for free on the internet, or when you run the Docker compose commands or Kubernetes deployment commands, automatically those tools will show you where the problem is. So this is how you define a list. Within this list, you can have name value pairs as well. For example, name colon Mac. Instead of directly giving Mac, there should be a space right there. So as you can see, Visual Studio Code also highlights. If we have an issue here, you see that this whole thing is in the same color. That's not how it should be. As soon as you give a space, this is in blue and this is in brown. Same name colon iPhone. Then the last one is name of the product colon desktop. So this is one way of defining a list. Another way, you can get rid of it. Go back to products, give it a space. Within square brackets, you can do the same thing. You can say name colon test comma another element. Instead of test, let me have it as iPhone, then name colon space Mac and so on. So this is another way to define a list of elements, but the previous method is the preferred one and it is more readable and most used. So let's stick to this, but just be aware that you can define your list as before as well using the square brackets and or using the hyphen symbols. Let's define one more element, the last one, to show you how to use dictionary or maps. Address colon. So this indentation, all these elements are at one level, but these list elements are child elements of this and they are all a part of this list. So that indentation has to be maintained. Under address, now I'm going to define another element called address will have a street colon. So define the street right there, say Springfield. Then we can have the city, Austin, and then the pin code and so on. But this, whatever you are defining here, is a dictionary type. So this address is a dictionary. Within that, we have several key value pairs. So that's the last type. So you can take this whole thing and you can validate it with online YAML parsers. So online YAML validator. If you search for that, you can use one of these. YAMLlint.com provides us one. Paste it, and automatically if you hit this go, it will validate it. It says valid YAML. So we are good to go. And let me show you a couple of YAML files which you will be creating from scratch in lectures later on. This is how the Docker compose will look like. See this is a name value pair where we are defining a character data or a string data, the version of Docker compose we are using. Then the services element. Within the services element, we define multiple services. I will be explaining the Docker compose syntax itself in the next lecture, but I want you to be aware of the different types of data you see here. This is simple string data. Then here you see for ports, this is a list. Again here depends on, this is a list. Otherwise it is very straightforward and human readable. Similarly, when you go to Kubernetes, here it's a very simple YAML file again, which we use to create a Kubernetes service, API version. What kind of resource are we dealing with? It's a Kubernetes service, then metadata, name and what is the name of this service, then a specification and so on. Here you see the list again, ports is a list. And you will be creating a deployment as well in Kubernetes. So using YAML is super easy, and this is the syntax for it. You can define simple data, you can define list data. List can be defined using hyphens, or list can be defined using square brackets. The object, yeah, this is the one I didn't mention. So here I will show you right here under products. If this name, instead of just the product name, if it has more price, so that's an object now, price colon say $1,500. So the syntax for objects is this guy right here. So you use a hyphen. Here it is a list of objects. So this can be an object of its own. The first element has a hyphen because it is a child element of the list. To define object, you simply put them with the same indentation at the same level. As long as elements are at the same level, they all belong to the same object, and programming languages can use YAML parsers and map these to a particular object, the product in this case. This is a list of products, and each object here can be mapped to a list. So don't be surprised when you see configuration which will start like this in the list, and when the second element doesn't have a hyphen, that means those all elements are a part of a single object. Similarly, you can have more here. Quantity, for example, quantity is 3. So this entire thing now is a object. So you have explored about YAML. YAML is a superset of JSON. It gives a easy way to exchange data, but it is mostly used in configuration today. It is a superset of JSON. The extension of a YAML file can be YML or YAML. YAML strictly follows indentation. Thanks to Visual Studio Code, most of the indentation is automatically given to us. And we save the YAML files. When we create YAML configuration files, we save them to our projects usually. So within our projects, when you create a Docker Compose file, you will put that in the coupon service or product service, and you will commit it to the Git repository, and multiple versions of it can be maintained. So we eventually are getting towards infrastructure as code. So all our configuration that will create all the infrastructure that is required through Kubernetes, through Ansible, etc., should be in the form of code, and it lives with the code we create as developers as well.